The discomfort. You couldn't explain something started to feel off, but you couldn't quite explain why. It wasn't a sudden change. There wasn't a specific event, no clear decision. It was quieter than that, as if, little by little, things that once made sense simply stopped making sense. Conversations that used to pull you in now feel shallow. Places you used to enjoy have lost their color. People you once felt close to now seem distant, even when they're right beside you. And then the thought appears, I've changed. But have you really? Maybe what you're feeling isn't change but perception, like a layer has been removed. And for the first time, you're seeing things as they actually are. That's uncomfortable, because truth rarely arrives with relief. It arrives with friction. You begin to notice patterns, small behaviors, automatic reactions, things you used to do without thinking. Now they feel almost programmed. And that's where the conflict begins. One part of you wants to go back, to feel light again, distracted, connected in the old way. But another part can't unsee what's been seen. And when you try to pretend nothing changed, something inside resists. Because deep down you know it wasn't a sudden shift, not a transformation, it was a realization. And the most unsettling part is understanding that what you're starting to see was always there. You just couldn't see it, and now that you can, there's no going back. The role you were always playing for a long time, you believed you were being yourself, that your opinions were yours, your choices came from within, that your personality was something real, something naturally built over time. But what if much of it never truly belonged to you? From early on you learned what was acceptable, what was rewarded, what made you liked, and what made you rejected. And without noticing, you adjusted, you softened your tone, filtered your thoughts, hid parts of yourself that might make others uncomfortable. Not because someone forced you to, but because you understood silently how the game worked. So you adapted. You created a version of yourself that functioned well in the world, one that avoided unnecessary conflict, that pleased others, that fit in, and it worked for a while. But every adaptation has a cost, because the more you shape yourself around expectations, the further you drift from who you actually are. And that distance doesn't disappear. It builds. It shows up as a quiet discomfort, a feeling of being slightly out of place, as if you're living a life that isn't entirely yours. And the strange part is, for a long time, you don't even notice. Because the version you created is convincing. It speaks like you, acts like you, responds like you, but it's not all of you. It's just the part that was allowed to exist. And when that realization begins, everything shifts. Because for the first time you ask, who am I without all of this? The moment you can't ignore it anymore. There comes a point where pretending stops working. Before, you could distract yourself, stay busy, fill your time with things that kept these questions away. But now it doesn't work anymore. The feeling is back, stronger, clearer, and it doesn't go away with distraction. You start noticing patterns in people around you, predictable conversations, automatic reactions, as if many are moving through life on autopilot without even realizing it. And the most uncomfortable part is recognizing that you were there too, following invisible scripts, reacting in ways that felt natural, but now reveal something deeper. This doesn't make you better than anyone, but it does place you somewhere different, a place where you see and can't go back to not seeing. And that can feel isolating, because once you begin to notice certain things, it becomes harder to connect the way you used to. Not because you don't want to, but because something in your perception has changed. You question more, observe more, react less, and that can make others misunderstand you, or think you've become distant, but in reality, you're more present than ever. The difference is, you're no longer just reacting to the world, you're watching it, and that changes everything. Because when you stop living on autopilot, you start noticing what was always there, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. The truth. Most people avoid. Most people don't want to see, not because they can't, but because seeing requires something many aren't willing to face: responsibility. Because the moment you recognize patterns in yourself and others, you can no longer hide behind ignorance. You begin to see choices that once felt inevitable, reactions that seemed natural, paths that felt like the only option, and you realize that in many cases you could have chosen differently. That's heavy, because it's far more comfortable to believe you're just a product of circumstances, that everything that happened was unavoidable. But clarity dissolves that story and replaces it with something more difficult: awareness. You realize that many things you accepted were just habits. Many of your limits were learned. Many of your fears were never truly yours. And that changes everything, because once you see that, you also see that you can choose differently. But choosing differently requires courage. It means stepping outside the familiar, the comfortable, the predictable. And that's rarely easy. In fact, it almost never is. But at the same time, it becomes impossible to ignore what you now understand. And that's why many people avoid this point, because once you see, there's no going back. You didn't change. You revealed yourself. Maybe you're still trying to understand what happened, trying to name this feeling, this distance, this strange clarity that appeared without warning. But maybe the answer is simpler than it seems. You didn't change. You just started seeing yourself more honestly. What you're noticing now isn't new. It's something that was always there, hidden beneath layers of adaptation, expectation, and habit. And now, those layers are fading. Not all at once, not completely, but enough for you to notice, and that alone changes everything. Because from this point on, you can't live the same way anymore. You can try to fit back in, ignore what you've seen, pretend nothing happened, but deep down, you know. You know something has been revealed, and that changes how you see everything: people, relationships, your own choices, and most importantly, yourself. This doesn't mean life becomes easier. In fact, it may feel more complex for a while, but it also becomes more real, more conscious, more yours. Because for the first time, you're not just living a functional version of yourself. You're beginning to meet who you truly are. And that process isn't fast, it isn't comfortable, but it is real, and maybe that's exactly what you've been searching for without even knowing it.